Welcome to our Cybersafe Digest weekly podcast, episode 35. Each week, we will unfold the most recent cyber attacks and will provide you with valuable insights on how to shield your business from these threats, along with practical steps and tips to enhance your cybersecurity.
Hello, everybody. I'm Martin Roberts, Managing Director of New Ways. I'm here with my colleague,
Toby Stevenson, Chief Technology Officer at New Ways.
And today, Toby, we are 35.
Yeah,
but we could but dream.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So episode 35 of the Cybersafe Digest. In previous episodes, we've talked about ransomware, Toby.
Yeah.
And we've alluded to it, and we've talked about it as different bits and reactions and things like that. But I think today would be a great day to sort of go through it in a little bit more depth. Now, let's remind ourselves of our audience. So this is for CEOs, CFOs, people who are in charge of IT, but not necessarily executing IT. What do you need to know? How will it manifest itself? What's going to happen? How should you behave? And what protections can you take against it? Right then. So, Toby, what's ransomware then?
Yeah. So ransomware is one of these boogeyman terms, I think, a little bit, and anecdotally, it seems to be one of the biggest concerns that most business leaders have, that they'll come into the office one day and they'll discover they've been hit by ransomware. But I think it's good to clarify what ransomware is and what we mean when we talk about ransomware. And I think the best way of describing it's a piece of malicious software that will do things on your systems, on your networks, that take them offline, and it is used to elicit some kind of ransom payment to bring them back online. So the way we normally see this manifest is systems being encrypted.
Okay, but I mean, as a practical, we've seen the dramas on TV and such like, or in the adverts and such like. So somebody will be sitting at their computer, and then suddenly something will happen.
Yeah. So the way that this would typically manifest, or the first thing that you would notice, would be one of two things. The first is that you would see a whole bunch of files change from their normal appearance. So you might have a folder that's got Word and Excel files in, and they've got that little icon, and they're called document1.docx or file2.xlsx or something like that. And those icons would change, and the file name would change to suggest that they are no longer a valid file. So you might have had a document1.docx, which is a Word document. That would then change to lose the Word icon, and it would be called document1.crypt or .xxx or .something. Okay. So in that particular example, what the ransomware is doing is restricting access to your files, so you can't do any work, because it's encrypting them with an encryption key that you don't know.
And if you try to open it, what will happen is
you just get an error. Now, normally what happens as a ransomware attack happens, so that's the first thing you would typically see is the files change. So if you're sat on your computer and ransomware is executed on your machine, you would start to see common business file types be encrypted, and they would change in their appearance and in their naming.
Okay, so here's a question. If you're sitting there in front of your computer and that starts happening, what should you do? What's the first thing you should do?
Take your computer off the network.
Okay, so either by unplugging the cable at the back, and also going to the icon tray and disabling the wireless.
Yeah. So really important. Well, we can come on to this in a later part, but the really important thing is that not to turn the computer off.
Okay.
So disconnect yourself from the network, because that means that any attempt of lateral movement by this particular software is less likely to be successful. It also means that any remote systems that you have access to that the ransomware is trying to encrypt, it won't be able to continue doing that. So you nip it in the bud.
Okay.
Then typically when the ransomware has finished executing, normally when it's finished executing, not always, you'll get a rather graphical pop-up that says, "Ooh, you've been ransomwared.
Yeah.
Give me some money and I will give you the decryption key."
With Matrix style.
Entirely possible. Yeah, entirely possible. Yeah.
Man in hoodie with no face.
Yes. Yeah. And the commonality here normally is that there will be a direction to go to a dark website to make the payment.
Okay. And let's just say that the first thing you've done is you've disconnected. So disconnected yourself from the network and you've switched off the wireless, clearly, thank goodness you won't be able to click on that link. But even if you haven't got round to the disconnection bit, don't click on that link. Is that a fair thing to suggest?
Yeah, you want to do as little as you can. So you don't want to engage necessarily.
Yep.
And the key thing in any ransomware attack is speed of reaction. So you want to try and contain the incident as quickly as you can. So we don't want to turn the computer off. And the reason we don't want to turn the computer off is that there might be artifacts in memory that we can use to help understand what's gone on.
Okay. Now here's the thing: is it's worthwhile actually sharing this information with your people, with your employees, and such like, because it might be not you, dear listener, that is experiencing this ransomware attack. Does everybody else in your organisation know how to behave? Number one.
Yeah, and that comes down to training,
yes,
and policies and procedures.
Yeah.
So the really boring side of IT, basically.
Yeah, and it is dull. There's no doubt about it.
But what you need to ensure is that everyone knows what they should do, and that they're drilled in it in many ways. So that it's a what do I do? And there's no dilly dallying. They don't have to go and try and find a document that tells them what to do, or they don't have to ring somebody up. Ideally, what you want is them to say, okay, this has happened. I now have to do A, B, C, D, and that would be disconnect the computer from the network.
Okay. And then the first person they should contact is
contact the IT department is the first thing, or your MSP. Okay. The second person you should contact is probably you, the listener, is the business leader, the business owner, somebody in a senior position, because depending on the nature of and the scale of the ransomware attack, other things might need to be done. Yeah. If you're very lucky, it will be contained just to that one device, and that might be a person that's at home and they can't hit your network. Yeah. But it might be within your network boundary, and that's why we need to inform the IT department, because they need to be on high alert to look for the telltale signs of this, or to expect other calls to come in.
Okay, I guess the other question there is, are they? Do you allow the people to switch their computers on at that point, or do you what's the safest thing you can do?
If their computers are not on yet, there's probably merit in saying don't turn your computer on yet until you've got a clearer understanding of what is going on.
Okay.
And again, depending on the tools that you've got and the monitoring capabilities, you might be able to establish when the ransomware infection took hold.
Yeah.
Because often these things will start weeks before they actually execute.
Now, so here's a practical thing to consider: is and we always find this out at the wrong time. In a situation like that, thinking about it very, very practically, how do you communicate with everybody else in the business to say, "Hey, don't switch your computer on," or "Be careful," or "Be aware"? And the first idea is to send out an email or a team message, but you don't want people to be using the computers. Have you got a list of phone numbers or SMS text numbers, so you can say to everybody, don't switch on this computer, or be aware we have a ransomware attack, or we have got a problem, don't do anything until contacting us. And that's a really practical thing you can do, folks, because it's not until you actually get into that situation do you go, oh, hang on a sec, have you got Fred's number? Oh, I haven't got Fred's number. And you lose valuable time.
Exactly. It's in my email, or it's on the file share, or it's in SharePoint, and these are systems that may not be accessible for some reason.
And this is why again, the other boring thing about emergency planning is actually to A, have a plan, and B, have the documentation to support it in a place that is accessible by appropriate people, and everybody knows what they have to do in that event.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and as part of that planning, you obviously want to try and exercise this in some way that you can, and we run tabletop exercises with a number of our customers to go through this exact thing. And what we typically find is that on the first time of running through, technically the technical controls are generally very strong. They've got good protection in place, they've got good firewalls and things like that, but when it comes to these soft things, how do you communicate, how do you tell people, what do you tell people? That's when you start to see the colour drain from face, and it's well, what do we do? What do we say? And these are really important things, because the language that's used and when is really important. So as part of this multi-point plan of action for someone that discovers ransomware. And if we were to say that step one is to disconnect from the network, somewhere in there, there needs to be something clear that says, don't say this, don't say that. You don't communicate with the outside world. Don't tell friends, family, partners, whatever.
And this is everyone's under pressure in this situation. The phones will start ringing if the telephone system has not been
exactly.
And if you've got people who normally take orders and they suddenly say, sorry, we can't take orders at the moment because we've got a ransomware attack.
Yeah,
that's absolutely hugely damaging. One, because actually it might not be true.
Exactly.
We don't know what the extent of that attack is and how much the business is compromised, but it will potentially damage the reputation of your business. So make sure there's a clear plan, but also make sure there's clear communications from you at the top, which says you don't talk about it. It's not because you want to hide it, it's because you need to understand what the extent of the problem is before you start communicating. No.
It's a military thing. It's control of information flow.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's think about an example that we've had recently, or we've heard about, and what the impacts of a ransomware attack will be. So somebody's come in, they found that hopefully we've got that paper plan out. We've told people not to talk about it and this thing. Hey, look, it happens. Now we'll just talk about one example, perhaps, or a couple, and then we'll talk about how it gets onto your computer in the first place. So what's the one that jumps to your mind, Toby?
Well, there's a few, and I think one of the things that's important to mention is that because of the way that these incidents currently have to be, or in many cases don't have to be reported to the authorities, getting hard data around SMBs who've been hit is very difficult because they don't always have to declare it. If you're a PLC, you do have to. If you're a public company, you have to do it. If you're a public authority, you have to notify the ICO. But if you're an SMB, you don't always have to, and that's the tricky part.
No, I think that let's just pick up on. It could be an acronym we could save to later, but no, we'll do it now. The ICO is the Information Commission's office. If you do have a data breach, you have to report it in certain circumstances, and in some people would say in all circumstances, and they will decide whether it's a problem.
Yeah.
Because if you don't report it, and you're later found out to have not reported,
and that you should have reported it,
that's a very dangerous place to be. And actually, that's the truth about this is we will only see the really bad examples or the really high profile examples.
Yeah, the ones that grab the headlines.
Yeah. I mean, as we are sitting here today, the likelihood is that somebody in an SMB somewhere in the UK has just switched on their computer and have just seen what we just described.
Yeah, exactly. It's not an if, it's a when.
Yes.
But the difficulty is making it feel relevant because we see that MGM got hit, or Royal Mail got hit, or the British Library got hit, and these are huge. They're all huge public-facing household names, and sometimes it's difficult to correlate that to your own orbit because these are big targets. These have got lots of money to pay out, and what we have to remember is that yes, they do, but it's normally quite hard to get into these organizations in such a way that you can extort from them, whereas attackers, so these are the low volume but high reward attacks. But there's another type of attack which is the high volume low reward, which is almost like the run rate, the bread and butter. These are the people that are going after the small to medium sized businesses because although they don't have much money relatively speaking to pay out, they're much easier to compromise. And so for the effort that it takes to hit a Royal Mail or an MGM Resorts or one of these other household names, you can perhaps hit 10 or 20 small to medium sized businesses,
and you'll have more success because they're less protected.
Because they don't have necessarily all of the skills and the tools and the capabilities to mitigate the impacts.
And furthermore, it's probably they don't have the preparation to deal with such an attack and know how to behave, which is what the purpose of this podcast is all about today, is how do you behave? Because these people I mean, you wouldn't believe it sometimes, but these people do actually have plans. It is written down. They do have insurers involved.
And they will, because most of these organizations will have high level information security accreditations, ISO 27001, things like that. And I've spoken to organizations before, and they kind of use this as some kind of shield. Well, we're ISO 27001. Yeah, but I can guarantee that the Royal Mail were, and they got hit.
Yeah.
And that MGM Resorts were.
Yeah.
And a lot of these other, high street names, FTSE 100, whatever you want to, however you want to term them, when they get hit, they've had all these accreditations in place, and it's not helped them particularly stop being hit.
Yeah. And look, and we can talk about only in the abstract here, folks, but we've seen people who've been compromised, SMEs, we've been calling to help them, and it's devastating. You'll get to demand for cryptocurrency, payments in cryptocurrency. Where do you start? How do you deal with all of this, as well as trying to stay in business? There's a lot going on. It is absolutely frantic. And you won't have the resources to deal with it. So let's talk about two things really: how you get ransomware in the first place. And we won't go on. We've talked about that quite a lot before, about phishing emails and such like, and software. Well, a quick couple of minutes on that, and then we'll talk about preventing.
Sure.
Because we don't want to deal with the ramifications of a compromise. We've described what it might look like, and we've also described now some of the impacts of it. So, how often does it happen? And again, it's about vigilance, isn't it? And it's also about honesty within the business. If somebody has clicked on a link, which they shouldn't have done, let's have some honesty and say, phone up the IT department or phone up whoever's relevant to the MSP and say, I think I've just clicked on a link.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's the big thing, and that comes from training. So knowing what to do, but also forming a no blame culture.
Yes.
That people make mistakes because that is the human condition.
Yeah.
What we need to be able to do, and it's easy to say when you're not in the midst of it, but it's fostering that non-punitive environment, so that you don't feel that if I accidentally clicked on this thing and you're going to get the sack. Then you've got to kind of break away from that, because actually they've made a mistake. But what they're trying to do now is help protect the business from the impacts of that.
And actually, just taking a step back there, one of the things we've got to train people is using. We've talked about various methods of training people and simulations and things like that, but be very cautious. I personally never ever click on a link in an email, probably to my detriment sometimes, because they are perfectly legitimate. But I have an abundance of caution. I actually also separate my personal email life and online life from my business online life. I have separate email accounts and whatever, because I would never want to cross-contaminate it by clicking
absolutely.
But I never. If I get an email from very legitimate sources, so for instance, I'm a member of Subscribe to Which, for instance. I get emails all the time from Which, and it says, click on here to go and find out some more. I'll actually go to the Which webpage every single time.
And navigate to find it.
Log in and navigate to find it. And that simple approach, never click on anything, is probably the best preventative you can do. But then if somebody does in your organization click on something and they think, oh, I shouldn't have done that, the ability to phone somebody up and say, or email somebody, I've done this, can you check, without blame, without having people's hair on fire running around, IT managers and screaming, makes a world of difference.
It definitely does, because it means that people respond more quickly. They don't spew on it and contemplate what this next action is going to mean for them.
So then we've talked about the practical things you can do, and we've also talked in the past about what are the other preventive measures you can put in place to protect you, from ransomware in the first place, and then we'll talk about what other things can we do or should we be doing.
Yeah, and this is probably one of these good areas where you can almost work backwards from it. So I've had this problem. What do I need to do to get myself out of the mess?
Yeah,
and invariably, that universal safety net is backups.
Yeah.
You need to be able to know that all your data is backed up somewhere. It can't be touched or tampered with by the ransomware. It can't be touched or tampered with by the threat actor. So one of the things that we see more commonly now is that it's almost like either a double or triple threat with the ransomware. So way back when it first came out, it was quite a simple transaction. It was get someone to run this, we'll encrypt all the stuff on your system, and we'll ask for money from you to give you the decryption key. And sometimes the decryption key works, and you paid your money over, you got the decryption key, everything went back. Invariably, you'd get on some kind of soft target list saying, yeah, these folks pay out, so target these. But that aside, you would tend to get back up and running and have access to your data. And some organizations, because they either have an unforeseen technical problem or haven't had the foresight for planning or whatever, end up having to go down that route anyway. They don't have the right backups or the right capabilities to recover. So that is a thing that sometimes still needs to happen anyway. But in response to that, a lot of IT organizations and vendors started building out communication and education to say, okay, well, you need to have backups that can do X, Y, and Z. They need to be separate from your main network. They need to be in immutable storage so the data can't be deleted. They need to be able to rapidly restore your environment to a point in time. All of these things that dilute the threat that ransomware brings, because we got to a stage at one point where people that had been hit by ransomware, when they were contacted by the threat actor, now we'll just restore from backup, thanks. We're not going to give you £50,000, 100,000, whatever. We'll just restore from backup. So what the threat actors started to do is they started to say, okay, well, and it shows that this is that cat and mouse game. They kind of pivot and evolve their threat offering. So rather than just being disruptive and saying, we're holding your files to ransom, give us some cash, what they will do first is they will get into your system, then take a copy of all of your data, and then encrypt everything. And say, give us some cash, we'll decrypt all your files. Oh, and by the way, we've taken a copy of everything, and we'll do something with it, give it to your competitors, post it on the public web, whatever, if you don't give us the money.
You see, some people who accuse criminals of being lazy and good for nothing is actually very innovative.
They are very entrepreneurial in some ways.
Absolutely.
And so that can be a huge problem, because then, okay, well, I can restore it all from backup, but they've still got the stuff. And so actually there might be some really sensitive stuff on there. There might be R&D data if you're an organization that's working on new products, or there might be really sensitive financial information. It might be information about your customers, or if you are working in education or in that sphere, you could have information about minors on your system. And this is all stuff that ideally you don't want in the public domain. And so you kind of think, well, I've covered off one base, but I haven't covered the other one, because they've got the data, and it makes it really difficult to protect against it. So backup is really, really important, because that's how you recover your systems back. But it also means that we also can't just rely on it. So again, there might have been a shift in mindset as well. I don't need to invest in the protection, because you're told I'm going to get hit anyway. And I've now got this really cool backup system that's going to put me back to within a second of when it happened. So I don't need to pay the ransom. But now, of course, we've seen the bad guys saying, well, we've got access to your files, we're going to leak them, we're going to sell them, whatever they're going to do with them. You want to stop them getting those data files. So we kind of now have to shift back to having a more balanced approach across all the different parts of the attack chain. So from them getting in and then doing something and then being able to recover. So absolutely essential that we've got that recovery capability. So that's definitely a place that we need to make sure that we're strong and we're robust in. And one of the things that's really, really important, and we have touched on this before, is that backup can't be connected to the server for any longer than it needs to be, and it can't be connected to the network for any longer than it needs to be. Because if your system gets hit with ransomware while that backup is connected, that backup is going to get hit as well. And we know back from the WannaCry and the NotPetya, there were big organizations that got completely wiped out because they got this really fancy backup infrastructure that replicated across 3, 4, 5, 6 sites, but it was all online, all on the network, all at the same time. And we can learn from their mistakes by not doing those things. But point is, you can't just rely on a USB drive that's attached to a server, or a NAS box that's sat in the corner and backing up to that, because they can be hit with the same ransomware that hits the organization.
Okay, so we've talked about some preparation there, regular backups. We've talked about employee training. We talked about having policies in place in the past. Policies is also part of training as well.
It is.
Yeah.
It is, and it's the guidelines on how people should behave with the system.
Yeah.
You know, if you don't tell people not to click on these things, and if they do to report it in this way, they don't know that they have to do that.
Yeah, and there's good education software out there you can subscribe to, which does simulations. You know, I get them regularly, and it's good. It's a good place to learn.
It is. I always refer to it as being a safe place to fail.
Yes,
and I think that's really important, because nothing reinforces a point bigger than you kicking yourself after you've made a mistake or been duped into something. So yeah, I think that's a big one too.
Right. So we've talked also. So we talked practically then about things to do in the event. At the real front end of the coalface when something goes wrong. Unplugging your machine, getting off the wireless and things like that, and contacting IT or MSP, and also contacting the incident response officer, for want of a better. Is there a team that convenes within your organisation which knows what to do to look about communication and things like that, and what to say to the outside world? The other call to make, of course, if it's appropriate, is to your insurer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that should be one of the. So there's a few people you should call right at the outset. The insurer is definitely right up there.
Yeah.
The police is also another option, because this is often a criminal activity, and unlike a decade ago, the police are much better at following these things up.
And actually, you might need something as simple as a crime number to actually make the insurance work.
Yeah, absolutely, exactly. Yeah, so yeah, there's a practical reason to do it as well.
Yes, absolutely. And your insurer will, in some cases, depending on your policy and depending who they are, will also have a response team that can actually step in and handle a lot of it for you and give you advice. And part of your insurance is there to cover that, and some of the insurance payout will cover that. But do be aware that not entirely. There will be a cover up to X amount of pounds where they will cover the incident response and getting the people in and the experts in to do whatever it needs to do. It may well actually be taken out the hands of your IT department or your MSP. And then they will instruct these third parties what to do to protect you, to protect your business, but also to protect the amount of money they'll have to pay out for this response.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think that's it's really important to check the policy to see what it covers, because if you take a policy and let's say it has £1 million of cover on it, they're not going to write you a check for £1 million and they go and fix the stuff. They have a very definite plan, and as you quite rightly say, Martin, a lot of that will be in their own incident response capability.
Yes,
there will be a much smaller portion probably attributed to replacement hardware, things like that, because it's not unheard of in some attacks for the insurer to say, well, we want everyone's hard disk.
Yeah.
Which, so you might have to go and buy new hard disks for everybody.
Yes.
If you've got modern slimline laptops that don't have hard disks in them because it's all soldered to the motherboard, that's the whole laptop. So you've got to replace the whole laptop. And that sum of cash might not cover your replacements. And you're less of a problem if you've got an internal IT team, but if you work with an MSP, the insurer might not pay for your MSP's time to get involved and help, because although they will have a response team that can do stuff, they don't really know anything about your environment. So there will be an expectation of collaboration with whoever looks after the IT.
So let me just state a bit of self-interest here, folks, because it's quite important. Your MSP or your IT provider will want to help. Of course they will. But it's going to cost you. It's going to cost you money, because you can't suddenly get all these people working on your systems and working with your insurer to put things right free of charge. So, be aware that may happen. It may feel like you're being ransomware the second time, but it isn't. We have resources that we have to deploy and to withdraw people.
And the recommendation would be speak to them before you need to use them for that. Understand what the rules of engagement are and what their attitude towards getting involved would be.
So I think the important takeaway on that particular one is, if you are insured, double check the insurance, see what it actually covers you for. And it's really tedious reading insurance policies and reading the cover and the provisions and all of those things and understanding it. But you know what? The best thing I can recommend is, if you are insured, get that policy out, read it, and what you don't understand, not because of technical language, but just the way it's phrased, ask the question, what does this mean? What does this mean? Because those insurers need to earn their money.
Yeah, definitely.
And those brokers need to earn their money. Find out what it is and what happens in such an event. We talked briefly earlier about tabletop exercises. Great exercise. It's a fabulous thing to do. We go in, we sit there with people and we say, let's go through an event. And we will co-host that, co-author that process with people. And it's a really revealing thing. We see eyes widen and jaws drop as they realise what would happen.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And we once sat through a whole meeting, which was several hours, Toby, you and I, having been asked to keep quiet because we were only attendees at that point. At the end, I said, well, what do you think, Martin? And I said, well, why didn't you phone your insurance? And they went, why? I said, well, they've got an incident response team. And I think the expression was quite rude at that point, somebody saying, well, why didn't we think about that earlier on? Just read your insurance policy, you'd have known.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, although they are in the business of not paying out, you actually are taking a service from them. And part of that advice that you will seek actually benefits them in the long run anyway, because you're better prepared.
Yeah, absolutely. So we appreciate people's time, and you've got other things to do, folks. We hope you've learned quite a bit from that. And it needs more thinking about. And what I would say to you, it's not just about ransomware, it's about incidents per se. How are you going to plan for them? Do plan for them, because having a plan is the best way to deal with anything and to know how you can respond or not respond. So have a plan, know how to behave, take those basics into account. And look, folks, Toby, thank you. Great insights.
Welcome.
It's been enjoyable to talk about that. It's not enjoyable to witness one or go through one. We know that. But if you have some thoughts about what to do in that situation, then that will help. So thank you very much, everybody, for listening to episode 35 of the Cybersafe Digest. I was Martin Roberts, and still am. And
I still am Toby Stevenson.
Great. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, everyone. We've reached the end of episode 35 of our Cybersafe Digest weekly podcast. Thank you very much for listening, and to make sure you don't miss out on our future episodes, hit that subscribe button on Spotify, Apple or Google Podcast. For more cybersecurity wisdom and resources, head over to our website at cybersafe.co.uk. See you next Thursday.